Welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors, the podcast that helps you get to know the people who start, grow, and exit 8, 9, and 10 figure businesses. In this episode, I'm joined by Friedlein. Now, Ashley's an incredible entrepreneur. He started, ran, and then sold eConsultancy, selling it to Centaur Media for £25 million. He then went on to found a software startup called Guild. Now, Guild actually recently shut down. It didn't work. And this experience of both starting a successful business that went on and was sold, and then also starting a business that failed, has given Ashley a really great perspective about what does and doesn't work in entrepreneurship and business. I sat down with Ashley in London recently to grill him and get under the skin to find out what key moments and decisions from his career we could all learn from. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Ashley Friedlein. Ashley, you ended up selling eConsultancy for 25 million. Incredible result. Congratulations, of course. But how did it start, and what made you decide to start that business?
It started, I guess, as what you'd now call a side hustle. So I was working at a digital agency back in the kind of late 90s in the dot-com boom and subsequent bust. And it was clear to me that we were all kind of making it up as we went along. You know, I mean, this was very early days. Things were evolving very quickly. I mean, they still are obviously now, but there were no books, there was no courses you could go on. The industry news was news rather than sort of best practice, how to do email, internet advertising, content management, whatever. And so I wanted, I guess, just to sort of learn and progress in my own career. I thought, how am I actually going to find out and learn about this stuff? I thought, well, actually talking to my peers, other people like me, doing a similar job would be the best way to learn, you know, not just what works, but sometimes more interestingly, importantly, what doesn't. And so it set it up as a sort of web-based community, essentially a peer group, no business model. You know, it wasn't meant to be a business ever. It was just something I did for fun. And I remember getting up at 5 a.m, go to the office, work from 6 till 9 on eConsultancy, do the agency day 9 till 6, and then work sort of 6 till sort of 10 or 11, but with no thought that I was actually going to make money out of it. But anyway, so, you know, then a few years later, there's a dot-com crash. The agency sort of shrank down a lot. I went to the south of France, wrote a book, etc., and then came back, and this website had been ticking along, this community growing, and it had an amazing bunch of people on it, decent levels of traffic. And I thought, well, maybe I should, you know, what am I going to do with myself? Maybe I should turn this into a business.
That's amazing. So it didn't feel like a risk to you, I think you said when we spoke earlier.
No, that's right. I mean, I think there's it's interesting, you know, people tend to think that entrepreneurs are big risk takers. I don't actually necessarily agree with that. Some might be more or less so, but actually I think most entrepreneurs are surprisingly conservative, or in some ways, you know, they worry about cash and things like that. So I don't think entrepreneurs necessarily are kind of risk takers, but it's certainly at that time for me, I was married but had no children. We had a sort of flat in London that we could rent out. There was the job market, because it was after the kind of dot-com crash, was pretty dead, so there was not much happening. So and I didn't have a job, so I didn't have sort of that much to lose, to be honest. And also I had only two. It was me and my co-founder Matt, and then we had 2 angel investors who were my sort of former bosses at the agency, who put in some money to get it going. And actually I put in, I think it was a £70,000 salary out of a £160,000 investment. So most of the money they were putting in was going on paying me what was, you know, back then, I mean, even now that's a pretty good salary, but back then that was quite a lot, really. And so I basically said, I'm not prepared to take a risk on my salary, essentially.
Wow.
So, which, you know, it was kind of different, really. I mean, very different from then subsequently, kind of what's happened with Guild and things. But yes, we did give away 49% of the business for that 160,000 back then, which turned out for them in the end to be a very good investment. Yeah,
so they would have made what, 12.5 million or so on that.
Something, I worked out, I mean, also because you got even then EIS relief, and so you get 30% back. And so if you, and then you get the gain is capital gains tax free. So I think it worked out over 100 times, what they put the money in, they got back. But I don't, you know, I certainly don't resent it. It couldn't have happened without them. And I think, you know, I could say now we're a little bit naive or a little bit overgenerous with the equity, which, you know, by all kind of normal accounts, I probably was. But on the other hand, I was just, I didn't really even have a business plan. I had no team. I had no proven experience. I mean, it was a pretty risky thing, arguably, for those two angel investors at the time.
Yeah. So, but even though you took investors and you brought an investment, this was still I guess, an old school business in that you were targeting profit straight away, right? This wasn't you didn't intend to keep raising. This was just the sort of capital to get it started.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I guess I knew nothing about the whole kind of VC or PE or kind of more sort of highly leveraged kind of models. So I guess it just partly just didn't occur to me. I think also this was after the dot-com crash, so sort of a lot of the easy money had gone, so in the time when people were raising tens of millions to leave their banking job in the city to go and do something or other in 98, 99, well, that had gone really. So there was no kind of easy capital around, I don't think. Also, because we'd been running the website for sort of 3 or 4 years as this side project, we had traffic, we had a user base, we had some content, our search rankings, we, did really well on a sort of SEO, almost by accident. It was the early days of SEO really, but loads of great inbound links and, because we were early to market all this digital marketing stuff. And so that was like a magnet then for more traffic and things. And so, in hindsight, we were starting off with quite a few of the sort of assets, advantages, which you might otherwise need money to build up over time. And, so the domain had been there for 3-4 years or something, kind of gradually, building up. So yes, it was, when we started, so we had this 160 grand, which was basically to last us a year, we thought, with a lot of that going to me. And then a bits of other money for some bit of marketing, bit of content, and half another person. So when we started, it was me plus a part-time other person. That was it. And we had free offices because we were sort of sharing with somebody we knew, again, from the agency. So some free office space. So it was very much bootstrapping, I guess, as you'd call it now. I don't know if that existed at the time, but yes. And, subsequently we'll get on to Guild, maybe it's a very, very different kind of approach. But yes, eConsulting was basically profitable from month one, grew the old fashioned way off the back of profits over the years, over sort of 10, 12 years in the end before we actually sold.
And how do you look back on that? Like you said, we'll come back to Guild later on, but how do you look back on that model now? Because a lot of people, when they're starting up today, their immediate thing is, well, one of my main jobs as a founder is to constantly raise money. Do you look at that and say that's just a different model? Do you look at that and say it's better or worse?
I don't think there's any easy answer, but there's different business models require different sorts of funding probably. So this eConsultancy is a media business, so it's sort of fundamentally about content, and then there's revenue streams around subscriptions, membership, events, training, advertising and things. And you can do those as you can an agency or consultancy with very little upfront costs, or not too many upfront costs, and be profitable quite quickly. What's harder is scaling it or being the profit margins are maybe less than if you've got a tech product. The challenge with a tech product's more like you need to put probably quite a lot of capital in to create the intellectual property. I think people say, oh, these days, the barriers have come down. It's so easy. Everything's in the cloud. That's kind of true, but it's true for everyone. So it's and everyone expects, Amazon, Apple, Google levels of functionality and customer experience and stuff. So I actually think it's got harder in some ways. And so to doing a tech product, you can see why there might be an argument you need to go big quickly because it's an arms race and that's the game you have to play. But I guess the advantage of a business which is geared for profit more from the outset is once you get to break even or profit, you've basically got choices. You've got time. You can. Again, and it depends on the market and the sector. Sometimes you've got competitors coming quickly, and so you have to either sell up or raise yourself or buy them, so it depends a bit on the sort of state of the market. But with eConsultancy, again, hindsight, whether it was luck or great shrewdness on our part, but thought that because after the dot-com crash, it's the end of the 99, 2000. It was almost like business went, oh, that internet thing's gone away now. You can't believe that now, but it was like that. It was like that was a blip, whereas I thought, well, this is massive. It's just, it's a cyclical market thing, but actually underlying internet is going to grow. It's going to power commerce as well as communications and networking and things, which of course is what happened. But we had 5 years maybe of pretty much no competition doing what we were doing. And indeed, we had a membership, so a paid kind of content model from about 2002, which was way ahead of, like at that time, it was, the received wisdom was information wanted to be free. It was an ad funded model. And, and I thought at the time, and actually it's lucky I hadn't come from a media or publishing background, arguably, because I'd have thought, well, that's the way to do it. Whereas I thought, well, no, we need to just create content that's good enough that people are prepared to pay for it. Yeah. As what happened then, that becomes a recurring revenue stream with renewals, and that's a good bedrock for, doing other stuff like events and training. And now that's quite normal. Look at all the newspapers, the FT, Wall Street Journal, even the Mail, I think, is doing paid subscriptions and stuff. But we were doing that 20 years ago. And at the time, it was kind of, everyone thought we were crazy. And so luckily, it turned out quite well. And when we came to sell, that was part of the journey or part of the story is, okay, you guys got into sort of subscriptions and some of these sort of high value things before anyone else did.
Right. It's a great example of using, I guess, an outsider's perspective on a problem and coming up with something that's actually really valuable.
No, it is kind of weird that on the one hand, I always think if you're going to do something, it's good to do it in an area that you know well, and particularly, maybe in an industry which you work in, which is what I did. I mean, when I built the consultancy, it was essentially for myself. So I was working in an internet agency going, oh my God, how do I do this SEO thing? Or what am I to believe? And then, I'll go and find some other people and ask them. And, but it was to help me really initially. It wasn't meant to be a business, but then you found, there's lots of other people like me who want this kind of, peer groups and this content and things. So yeah.
And then the next big, I guess, life event around eConsultancy was your decision to sell to Centaur. What stage was the business at when you decided to sell, and why was that the right time for you?
I think it's a combination of factors. I suppose because we had taken, I think there was there's only 4 shareholders, me, my co-founder, 2 angel investors who were also the board. We always felt, I think, that we wanted to sell, but we just didn't have any particular time horizon or really any particular valuation sort of target. So it was more when it felt right. I think for me personally, I felt that it was, there was some things I was less excited about because they were kind of repeat, okay, it's that event again this year and stuff. And so I enjoy the kind of early stages, the ideas, building the proposition, taking it to market, getting the feedback and things. But when it comes to sort of, it's about scaling it or industrializing the kind of thing, personally, I just think I'm sort of less excited, energized, and probably therefore less good at that. So there's a bit of that creeping in that I've been doing it sort of 10 years and thinking, okay, so maybe feeling a sort of bit tired or let's say a bit less excited. We'd gone international. So there's a few things we wanted to do. We wanted to get to $1 million in profit, EBITDA profit, just because psychologically that sounded good. And that buys, as you say, buys you options. Like if we didn't have to sell, that you can afford to invest quite a lot in new product development if you've got $1 million worth of profit. So we want to get to that. And also for acquirers, we'd heard that, it costs for a big-ish, acquirer, it costs them the same amount of effort and time to buy a business that's doing 10 million profit as it is 1 million or, so they'd rather have the slightly bigger profit ones rather than 100 grand one or whatever. So that was a sort of yardstick. We wanted to do international. So we had London headquarters, but we had offices in New York, Dubai, Sydney and Singapore. I mean, some of them quite small. But we wanted to show, essentially, be able to tell a story. I mean, also just I personally was interested in doing business in some of these other countries. It's very interesting culturally, technically. When we started, had the office in Singapore, we did events in Shanghai and things. It was, if you were looking at mobile or aspects of social media, mobile commerce, social media, that like Asia was way ahead of the US or Europe. So when we were talking about trends, for example, it was good to be able to look at that globally kind of thing and go, aha, this might be coming further down the line because we can see in China or whatever it is, Japan, how it's happening. So yeah, we wanted to go international. And then it was really just a sort of market, we'd started to get interest as in sort of, and I always think ideally if you're selling, you want to have people coming to you.
Absolutely.
Like if you're approaching them, you're already losing, which I did have that experience with Guild latterly. But so yeah, we were just getting inbound stuff without trying.
Right.
And then there was the whole sort of, was it 2007 and 8 kind of financial crash and things. And that impacted media businesses like Centaur, who came to acquire us because the advertising kind of marketing market died a bit of a death. And so all of a sudden, and there was the Euro issue with Greece and all this sort of stuff. So these companies were going, we need to get out of like ad funded kind of models into subscriptions and other kind of products. We need to not rely on just the UK or Europe as our market. We need to go more global. Digital is actually a thing after all. We need to get more into digital. And so literally we were like, tick, 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 all these things. And so we were a hot property. Right. And I suppose that just meant that the stars kind of aligned and we thought, look, we can either, sell, or I guess if we were being even more ambitious, we could have raised money and bought other people and scaled it more, which is often, the accusation of British entrepreneurs sell out to the Americans or whatever, whereas, others, they do go just bigger and bigger and bigger. But we did sell. And in the end, I mean, we had lots of, genuinely lots of interest. And so we had genuine competitive tension, which obviously helped kind of push up the price, or at least help us negotiate the terms of the deal, because we actually offered a 5-year earnout. We were prepared to do a 5-year earnout, which is kind of a long time. And
that's
people
really
say,
long time.
Don't do that because you'll fall out with it and it'll be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But we were still enjoying it. And we still believed in the growth and the profit growth. So we sold it on a multiple of EBITDA, which is sort of 12-ish times EBITDA, which is for a media business is a lot. For technology business is not so much, but a subs data business is kind of still the case. They sell 12 to 15 times. And, we were at 1 million EBITDA at the point of selling. And we thought in 5 years' time, we'll be at 5 million. And we were genuinely believed that was possible. And therefore we thought, well, we're going to get 12 times 5 million on the kind of back half of the deal, then good. Right. But we're up for it. As long as we said we'll only do the 5 years if we basically, although you own us, you have very little control over us. Like we can make all our own decisions. We can stay in our own offices, our own IT, all our hiring, firing, and our budget. Basically, you have very little control with. So we could retain our sense of independence, but while still having actually sold, got some money up front and some further down the line. That's in the end, we got bought out after 2.5 years or something. So it didn't ever go that long.
And then choosing an acquirer. So you mentioned you had lots of offers, and I don't think the offer that you went with was necessarily the highest value. So what was part of your decision around that?
Yeah, it was, again, a number of things where there were a couple of offers we had, for example, which were a higher upfront amount. So, for example, and don't quote me exactly on these figures, but say we got, we had one offer, I can say, which was for 20 million upfront.
Right.
But that was it, and we'd just walk away. And that was quite tempting because it's very clean.
That's a huge multiple.
And, the other one we're looking at sort of 12 million-ish and then maybe some more down the line. So it's like, bird in the bush versus 2 in the hand or whatever. Wherever the bush is in the hand.
20 in the hand.
So that was kind of tempting. But I say because we genuinely believed in our ability to grow, we thought, actually, no, we could do better if we wait. As it turned out, we did. Not that much better, to be fair. And given that it was 2.5 years, you could say, well, the extra 5 million you probably got was it worth it, for 2.5 years work? I don't know. Yes, I think so. But other factors were, we wanted to be a sort of bigger fish in a smaller pond rather than, so some of the businesses, so for Centaur, for example, we were quite a big acquisition. Like we made they were PLC, but a small PLC. It was a class 1 transaction, which means it's kind of quite a big deal for them. Yeah. And they, therefore cared about us because it materially affected their share price and all that kind of stuff. And there's some downsides to that because they're crawling all over you and it's like all quite intense. Whereas if you're a rounding error in a big company's thing, they're like, oh, whatever. But we would rather we'd rather matter, I guess, rather than be just some tiny thing in a massive. And so some of the organizations we were talking to were huge American businesses where we would have been tiny. And I also, having had the foreign offices, I didn't fancy being up late at night or early in the morning speaking to the US overlords or reporting back and things. Just didn't fancy. I'd rather ideally have a business acquirer who was UK based, just so that then that kind of, it was easy in London based, easy to have that, that kind of contact. And then, there was some where, their plans for the business were very different. So some were going to strip away some parts of the business. Some were going to fire everyone and do X. Some were really only interested in the data, some interested in the events. And, so there were various ones where you kind of looked at and thought, oh, that's going to be painful or not much fun. But whereas with Centaur, it felt like a kind of right balance of the level of attention, the level of importance to them, the level of opportunity, the fact they're a UK-based company, et cetera, which kind of just in the end felt like the right route to go. And I don't regret it. I think it was actually.
Well, the fact that you wanted to continue working in the business, I think, is a real testament to the acquirer that you chose. It's interesting you mentioned about the UK-US thing. I was talking to someone recently who they sold a healthcare agency group to a huge USP firm. And the main breakdown, the reason they had to leave in the end was because they were sick of being on really late West Coast time calls.
I know.
And it's those little practical things that people might not think about, but actually, it sucks to be on calls every day at 11 p.m.
Yeah, exactly. And particularly if you've, often startups, obviously you've lived this, notwithstanding remote working, COVID and stuff, but, this intense, very kind of peoply close experience to get to where you got. And eConsultancy at the point we saw was maybe 120 people. So it's not small, but not big really either. And again, it was at that stage where I knew everyone by name, but I was starting to think, I don't know who that person is there.
Right.
And also I'd had a policy up until near that point where I was part of the interview process of any new recruit, like whatever level of seniority and things, just because I wanted to, but that becomes not really scalable at a certain point.
Yeah.
And we hadn't also grown, although we'd grown quite quickly. It's not like a tech startup where sometimes if they're in hyper growth or in a scale up, it's like doubling, tripling staff. And I mean, it's exciting, but chaotic as well. So eConsultancy was not quite like that. It wasn't quite that rocket ship.
Yeah. But I can totally identify. I mean, I sort of, I wouldn't say got fed up, but I realized that I wasn't the right person to run my agency when we got to about probably 70, because it just starts to feel, as soon as like a big part of your day is change management and things, and just like communicating messages to people, I just want to get stuck into stuff. And
you do. It's sort of managing people and money mostly after time. And as I say, business would be easy if it wasn't for staff and customers. But I do, I like, I guess, this sort of the proposition, the idea, the kind of prototyping, the get it to market, the testing and learning, being in front of customers. Actually, one of my investors who's now, I think I'll probably say it, he's CEO of VML, which is a WPP agency, massive kind of thing. But I was talking to him the other day about, what he's doing. He said, and he's a brilliant salesman. It's called Ewan, one of my angel investors. And he said, I've got back into pitching, I'm now back out there, the prospects, client meetings, selling, essentially pitching. And I'm really enjoying it, because for so long, his job had been more about, structures and M&A and, finance stuff and people management, hiring and things, which is fine, had to be done. It's super important. But you do just miss that kind of energy and excitement of being at the coalface.
I did a pitch in London recently, and compared to just working on spreadsheets, it's just a different energy, isn't it? It's so good. So, all right, so you sold eConsultancy, you stayed on for 2.5 years.
I'm still minorly involved, actually.
You're still minorly involved.
The first person in, last person out.
Right, clinging on. At what point did you decide to start Guild? Did you have any sort of break between sort of formally leaving and starting the next thing?
Yes. So, I mean, Guild, the company was, I think, incorporated in 2016, started working on the idea and the product 2018, 2019, and sort of launched 2020. So it evolved over a period of time.
Right.
And I think it's one of those, I guess most entrepreneurs every day have ideas. And I'm sure, ideas feel pretty easy. I mean, execution's somewhat harder, but it was one of those ideas that didn't go away, you sort of kind of keep coming back to. Some ideas you kind of wake up immediately the next day and go, that's a shit idea.
I'm glad I didn't start that one.
I'm not going to do, that's just not me. It's a good idea, but just it doesn't kind of energize me. Whereas the sort of Guild thing kept coming back. And so it ended up, but I spent a period of time where, after the kind of eConsultancy earnout ended, I went down to sort of half 2 days a week-ish.
Right.
And then I worked with Matt, who's my co-founder of eConsultancy. He's the sort of tech genius. He'd started a business, co-founded a business with his business partner, Paddy, called Ably, which was a real-time data infrastructure platform. way above my technical pay grades. But I knew obviously Matt well, trusted him. And so I became an early investor in that. And I worked in the early days about 2 days a week for Ably with them,
right,
doing more sort of content marketing, commercially stuff. I was involved, say, as this sort of angel investor, and then the sort of seed round, and then it's gone on to sort of Series A and B. And so I'm still an investor there, but not sort of day-to-day involved. I was chairman of the board for a little while. So I was doing that for a number of years, sort of half of my time while sort of mulling and guild and tinkering around with that before it kind of then became the full-time thing.
And that investment, before we go on to Guild, that investment's worked out really well, hasn't it, for you?
Yes. Yeah, phenomenally well. Much easier than being an actual entrepreneur as an investor. I mean, it was, it was, I mean, because of the EIS, so I put in money, you get your sort of 30%. And in fact, it's even some was SEIS, so 50 or between 50 and 30% back. And then in the case of Ably, when it got to its Series B, it was valued over 100 million. And I was the first external investor. And so obviously the valuation I put in that was nothing like that. And the incoming VCs were happy to buy out kind of early investors. So sort of secondary, as they call it.
Yeah.
And so I sold a chunk of my shares in that, tax-free, because it's EIS, capital gains, and I had them more than 3 years and something. And so yeah, I thought, well, this is like, they poor bastards are still doing all the work, built the value. The VCs don't pay out to the founders because they want to keep them in the business, keep them hungry, as it were. You take a little bit of money, but not much. Whereas, useless sleeping investors like me, they're quite happy to buy out. So yeah, while you combine the returns on that with the fact it was tax-free and on EIS and all that kind of stuff, it did fantastically well, and it's still going. I still have an investment in it as well. But I have a number of investments, some of which have done extraordinarily well, most notably Ably, some which are doing very well, some which have failed, some of which might fail. So it's a bit of a spread, really. I'm not sure I've cracked the magic, but yeah, I've had one big win at least, so that's good.
Oh, that's great, isn't it? And so you saw the investment side of things work really well. That's really great. I don't have to work day to day in the business. Startups are a mug's game, and then you went into the startup, right? So,
I know.
So you mentioned that Guild was like the idea that wouldn't die. This was something that you just felt like you had to do.
Yeah.
What did you spot when you started Guild?
Well, I suppose in the noughties and tens, post 2007 was iPhone, I think, wasn't it, launched?
Yeah.
That, and being in eConsultancy was all about digital marketing and trends and stuff. It didn't take a rocket science to see that mobile was a thing, and we don't realize that now. My children can't believe that there was a world pre-mobile phones, but there was. And so I thought, this mobile thing is kind of obviously a big trend, and it's not going to go away. And you can look at that and say, the younger children, it's all kind of mobile stuff. And so initially that was like mobile web responsive design type stuff. But then I'd also, specifically mobile messaging, which is a sort of different, protocol medium experience. I thought, just like, email and then social media, messaging as a channel is surely only going to grow and not just be used with friends and family, but for business communications and indeed transactions. And saying, looking at Asia, where I'd seen kind of WeChat, which does everything, and even WhatsApp in India, for example, you can do e-commerce and all sorts of stuff on it. I thought, that's coming to the West. And I guess my enduring broad passion across all these things has been about, with eConsultancy and Guild, is about professional communities. So it's about bringing people, peers together who work on a particular area to share and learn from each other. And you can do that in events, you can do that in training type stuff. I was particularly interested in how do you do that digitally? And so with eConsultancy, that was web-based communities broadly, then with an offline component. But I thought I'd seen WhatsApp groups in particular in the UK starting to spring up in business context. It might be senior leadership teams to start with, but then it started to be maybe prospects, maybe customers, maybe peer groups and things. And I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting. I think that's only going to continue to grow. But I thought, WhatsApp's not ideal for this. It's like a consumer messaging app. It doesn't have kind of any threading. You can't see back in time. It's owned by Facebook/Meta, who I have sort of ethical concern, data concerns about, not GDPR compliant, all this sort of stuff. And I thought, can I create, in the same way you've got like Facebook and LinkedIn, both arguably social professional networking, that you could have WhatsApp and Guild. And Guild was just your professional kind of messaging experience and sort of group experience, and fine, you can use WhatsApp for the football team and friends and family. And WhatsApp was getting just too noisy and overwhelming as well to also have work stuff going through it. And at the weekends, if I've got pings and tings on WhatsApp and it's half work, I just don't want that. So that was basically the kind of idea. I thought, well, can we, well, let's go big, let's compete with WhatsApp and LinkedIn and Slack and whatever, and create a sort of, a messaging, mobile first messaging kind of type experience, but which is specifically for sort of professional groups and communities, had no advertising, no dodgy use of data, was a sort of freemium SaaS kind of model. We're going to grow like, Trello, Dropbox, MailChimp, a sort of product-led growth, etc. This is going to be nothing or massive. Guess what? Yeah.
And when you pitch it like that, when you set the vision for it, I'm thinking, this is great. I would sign up for that immediately. But, and yet it's just being closed down. So
yes.
What happened? And then the next question is, and when did you realize that it needed to be closed down?
Yeah, I haven't yet, I suppose, done a full kind of retrospective. I keep meaning to try and, maybe write a sort of a blog post or whatever article about, sort of what went wrong or what might have gone better. And maybe that would be good therapy. Or I don't know. Or maybe I don't know if I know the answers yet. There are lots of things which went right. So like the team was great. The product, I think, was great. The shareholder investor experience, Touchwood, was great, even though they lost their money. Our customers liked it. We had great renewal rates and things like that. So there was lots that was good about it. I think the two things, I guess, which were particularly hard, one of which is obvious, one maybe slightly less so. The obvious thing is that competing with WhatsApp turns out to be quite hard.
Yeah.
And I knew, and everyone knows, that taking on these essentially monopolies, it's like taking on LinkedIn, is hard. And we know that changing people's habits is really, really hard. Even so, there's that thing about if you up against something where there's a habit and the incumbent, anything new needs to be 10 times as good or different. It can't just be a bit better. Because it's just like people are, well, WhatsApp's good enough.
Yeah.
Or do I need another app? I'm not sure I want another app. And I've got to check that. Or when it's on the 5th swipe screen, I've got notifications turned off and stuff. So getting, just trying to create repeat usage. And obviously, if you're running a group or community and it's engaged, that's great. If no one's engaging, it's not so great. So that is not surprising. I mean, we knew, to be honest, that was going to be a challenge, and it was, and it is. And I think in the different messaging apps in different countries that are more or less dominant, and interestingly in the US, WhatsApp's nothing like as dominant as it is in, say, the UK or Europe or India and Middle East. But then you go, say, China, it's WeChat, and Japan, it's different, and Korea, it's different. So there are different sort of dominant apps, but they are basically monopolies. I mean, it is. And so now, yes, when I'm starting to think about new ideas, I'm thinking about ideas, how do I just use WhatsApp rather than the business API? But anyway, that's for another day. Just say, okay, give up and kind of go with it. But so, I think that was one thing that was always going to hard to kind of create new habits and bed them in. It was also the opportunity, because if you could do that, it's a massive defensible
sticky,
moat.
Wouldn't it?
It's like, well,
absolutely.
If Guild had become the everyone goes, well, that's the business messaging app that everyone uses. That's like massively valuable. So that's our crazy ambition that we could actually achieve that. We did, arguably in the UK, in certain areas, marketing, HR, we had clusters of people where you got the sense that everyone thought that everyone was on Guild because there happened to be a few hot clusters. So if we'd managed to scale that, you'd have got more of a feeling that, oh, Guild's just the one you use. Never quite got there, sadly. The other big factor, which is probably less obvious, it was probably a bit of a blind spot. Having said, earlier that I think it's good to create businesses in an industry you know well, because you genuinely know the language, you know the people, you know the pain points, you know the trends and stuff, and you are the target market. For me, who had, with eConsultancy and other things, thought that why wouldn't everyone want to create a professional community or a professional network or group? And it isn't that hard to run one. It's kind of bleedingly obvious why you'd want it and how to do it. As it turns out, though, that's not true. Actually, to for a business to buy into investing time and or resources into creating some kind of community with their prospects or customers is not a line item in the budget yet. You know,
No.
and I think of it maybe a bit like social media or even the internet, frankly. I remember digital days where you go to business and go, you need a website. You go, why would I need one of those? You know, and now that's unthinkable. Same with social media. It's like early days of that. What, do we really need to be on that? So I thought community would be like that. And I do think there is a trend now away from public social media back towards more private, curated, quality controlled groups. But a lot of them are on WhatsApp still. It turns out not everyone's convinced that they need to have some sort of professional community. And actually there is a skill and an art or a science in being a good community builder manager.
Yeah.
And that's not a job function that exists in most companies still.
No.
So it's either it's early days or it's just a very small market actually, or smaller than I'd hoped it would be.
Obviously taking the decision to shut down Guild, that was a decision, but you must have seen it coming. Running a business is really hard. Starting a business is really hard. I'm thinking about that illustration of the miner who's chipping away at the rock and decides to turn back just before they get to the diamond. How did you decide that this was the right decision versus we just need to keep pushing? We're almost at the diamonds here.
Yeah, I think it's a tough decision. And I think sometimes there's what risks being a slightly dangerous myth or piece of best practice, which is you've just got to keep going. Because I think you hear the case studies about where some business pivoted and like Slack or whatever, and it almost failed, but then they just kept going or tried something different and all of a sudden it worked out. You don't hear about the kind of 99 out of 100 where that didn't happen or someone, broke their mental health, their marriage, where they lost their home because they carried on when they should have stopped mining, actually. How do you know the difference between the two? Well, that's a bit tricky, I guess, isn't it? But I suppose with Guild, there are a few things that it was hard for a while where I could feel like, I think this just isn't working. I mean, you're looking at data, usage, growth rates, revenue, the time to sale, to make the sale, all sorts of things where I thought these metrics aren't, well, they're not good enough to take to a VC, that's for sure.
Right.
And the next stage would have been Series A, on the journey that we were on.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that's obviously got cash and financial implications. Like if we can't improve these metrics, then we're not going to be able to raise the money, full stop. So that's just a reality check. Yeah. And then you would decide, well, could you raise more angel money? Could you pivot to just being a smaller, profitable business? Because we'd only had angel investors, so we didn't have any sort of institutional VC or PE type pressure to kind of necessarily grow at all costs. But it's a sort of period where I could feel, this isn't working. But to my investors or to the staff and to customers and selling, you can't show that because it's demotivating or not, So there's a period where I felt it was kind of hard, where you're kind of showing one face but feeling another.
Yeah.
And then I guess just coming to we did try some, not like full on pivots, but we did try different things. They worked a bit, but not enough. There were some routes we could have gone down, like going enterprise software or going ad funded, which we just didn't want to. We didn't actually think would work or work that well. Didn't fit with our original vision. We just didn't want to do it, even if it might have worked. So I think, the hard thing was basically coming to realization that it wasn't working out. I had to kind of admit that to the kind of shareholders and things and the staff, not to customers at that stage, I guess, and then kind of make a plan, well, what we're going to do. And, the sort of obvious or simple answers were, let's see could we find a buyer to, take it on. And if they've got lots of scale and reach, maybe they can do what we had failed to do, which we tried that and failed also at that. Didn't manage to find a buyer.
Right.
So for a number of reasons. But I think the hard thing was when there's lack of clarity, like you're living in a slight limbo of you're not sure. But once you sort of made a decision, and we had a path and said, okay, we're going to spend 6 months trying to, sell the business. If we can't do that, we're going to kind of wind it down. And so once we had a kind of a plan, then, and also we have managed, I wanted to not just go like bust overnight. We could have done, we could have in theory kind of carried on trying until you fall off a cliff. You just like, you got no money left. I didn't want to do that. And so we did, we gave all our customers 6 months notice at least that we were trying to sell the business, but it could close down and therefore they might want to migrate somewhere else. We have at the point of closing, no creditors, so we didn't actually run out of money. So it was fairly gracefully, touch words, kind of wound down, which was important to me. First, mostly my personal reputation, just sense of sort of integrity and doing the right thing by staff and customers and investors. So, and weirdly, I've learnt a lot about voluntary liquidations and insolvency stuff and legal and assets and like any of these things, like opening foreign offices like I did with eConsultancy. I'm not sure I'd do it again, and even at the time it was hard, but it's a learning experience. And I sort of feel then, well, if I'm talking to other entrepreneurs or even doing things like this, it's almost just as interesting to talk about failure as success, or the things that people don't normally talk about, but where the realities of winding down a business and different ways that can be done and what tax, so you don't hear about those things so much. So in some weird way, I think, well, it's good to have gone through it. It wasn't the plan. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but still, you can then empathize, I guess, better with people in similar situations. Yeah. And there's lots of entrepreneurs at the moment. That's the whole tech world obviously has had a sort of harder time of late. There are probably still a lot of businesses that are sort of bleeding out at the moment or eking a living, frankly. It's tough,
It's a very brave decision, I think, to shut something down. Because like you say, the sort of accepted wisdom is, well, Elon Musk says it's like eating broken glass and staring into the abyss. That exactly sounds like my situation. So therefore, I'm just like Elon, like go me, and I'm just going to keep grinding it out. But to say to the team, I mean, can you remember when you sort of told the team that we're going to be shutting this down, and how did you feel about that?
Well, it's a fairly negative analogy to think of like a car crash in slow motion, but it was sort of like, as in you could see a potential endpoint and then sort of everything would have to happen in between things. I think we were only a sort of small team, so it was sort of 15 at its height, and of which 5 were the sort of developer team based in Poland. So it was never like a lot of people. And we had, everyone was, it was everyone kind of knew what was going on. We had, obviously weekly kind of trading and update meetings, and everyone knew we were missing our targets. I suppose what they didn't necessarily know is, well, what is the implication of that, but I think I can't remember exactly, we were kind of honest, like we say, in terms of, I knew that we had, enough cash in the bank, for example, to pay their salaries for even despite not hitting our targets for a certain time. I think it was known in the business, say, that we weren't doing as well as we'd hoped. At the point where that, and I suppose that, if we had sold the business, there were some with sort of share options, or, where that could have been a good outcome for them. So, I don't ever remember that being I can't remember a specific, sometimes it's the all hands meeting where it's like, the big announcement. Good news, we've been acquired or something. It's like, it's not usually good news. But anyway, it wasn't, I don't remember a sort of point in time like that. It was more sort of ongoing discussion. And then, but there did come a point where we had to start letting people go. Which is never easy, but I don't think it was a surprise to anyone. And for some of them, like in the wind down period at the end where we were trying to sell, a couple of people said, well, we need to conserve cash to give us this sort of runway time to try and sell. And therefore, we can't afford to pay you past June or whatever, or can you go to half time or become a contractor and just do 2 hours a week, or, and then they, I think, understood the reality of that.
Yeah. Looking back on the whole sort of guild experience, is there anything that you would do differently knowing what you know now?
Well, I guess overall I don't regret it is the main thing. And it's like that Jeff Bezos regret minimization framework thing. I would have regretted not doing it. Yeah. I think. And so even the fact that it didn't work out as planned is a shame, but it's not. But I think I would have been really annoyed with myself, or it would have been kind of maybe chewed on my mind if I thought I never did it and then seen someone else do it and think, damn. So I don't regret doing it. In terms of doing things differently, again, I don't regret, like, say, eConsultancy was, smallish but profitable, media, 2 angel investors, that was it. Multiple revenue streams. And before that, and it was a media business. Before that, so I worked in an agency, which is a selling time basically and people. eConsultancy was selling content wrapped in various ways, a bit more scalable, but still. And whereas with Guild, I wanted to do a business model that was product, single revenue stream, SaaS, and ideally mobile focused, because it was different from the other business models and things I'd been involved with. And I wanted to think, well, because I'd luckily been made the money from eConsultancy, I could afford to risk saying I might as well go big. Like, if I can get an investment, and why not dream big? What's the worst that could happen? So that's come to pass. But, so it's, I'm glad we didn't, some of the pivots we talked about, say going to ad funded model, I don't regret not, giving that a go and things. I might, maybe we should talk again in a year's time when something else has popped out and is doing exactly what we did, except it's doing fantastically well. You're like, it was a matter of timing. It might be a matter of timing as much as anything. One person suggested, and I think maybe he was right. He said, well, you should have tried, because we didn't try for the US market really, not initially. Partly from my experiences of eConsultancy, where, the US is the graveyard of many UK businesses. And I'd seen how hard it was as a small brand in the US to make any indent in that market. So I thought, I'll worry about US later. Let's just focus really on the UK and Europe. But, this person's view is like, nah, it's something like that. If you essentially are talking about trying to compete with WhatsApp or LinkedIn, even in a small way, you've got to go to the US market, and you should have raised 30, 50 million, not 3 million. And like, yeah, that might be right, actually. I mean, but I'm not, unfortunately, or clearly not Elon Musk grade sort of self-delusional. I'm sort of self-deluded to a degree and self-confidence, but didn't have that ambition apparently already. So that might have been the right thing to do. But I mean, I could say that if I was doing it differently in the sense that, something that could have survived, we raised over 3 million. And if we had, there's phases you go through where I've seen this in other startups. I mean, when you just raise a load of money, it's very hard not to start spending it. And actually there's pressure from investors to like, well, if you're giving the money, then you need it and you should be spending it. So you hire more expensive people, but then you become a bit unless your sort of sales are keeping up, you're kind of eating into your money quicker, or you become inefficient, you become a bit lazy because you've got the money there in the bank and so you might as well spend it. So now if I sort of look back and think, well, I could have made that money last a lot longer. I could still be sitting on, I mean, Guild was revenue-wise was up to about 20 grand a month when we closed. Actually, I could run the business on pretty much break even at that, but with hardly any staff and hardly much tech. It could have survived, but it would have been like a sort of cockroach. I mean, it would have been zombie thing that, I just think, well, I can string it out for another 3 years. And by that stage, we would have underinvested. The competitors would have moved on and things. So, well, that I'm not sure. And, to the other people you want to say, here's what I'm selling you is 3 years of grinding it out in the hope that something might change. Well, that's not really much of a strategy or something to get too excited about. But I say don't yet quite, but I should, or we the shareholders still have the tech. I mean, it's been kind of mothballed, and I'm still half hopeful that either with some new crazy idea will come out and think, I could use that for that, or someone else will come along and go, you spent 2 million quid in 5 years building actually very good sort of messaging and networking infrastructure that it would, that we might find a home for it yet. Yeah, but we'll see.
It sounds like you're very much at peace with it, despite these what ifs, sort of. What if we'd raised more? What if we'd gone to the US? But you seem to be very at peace with the decision, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's happened over quite a while, like a year, really, at least a year. And so sometimes it's felt, harder than others. But having some sort of clarity, and also not so things that I regret is helpful in that. And I suppose although I'm kind of trying hard not to start another business, something I'm quite yet, that I've had a bit more time now to play around with or meet up with people, have conversations. AI is something which I sort of could talk a little bit about, but recently now I've actually had a chance to start playing with it and like, this is kind of quite exciting actually. And so I suppose I'm just sort of feeling a sort of positive energy of new potential, as opposed to, the sort of number of years where you're sort of grinding out, doing kind of sales or kind of watching the money or, putting on a bit more of a show than you'd kind of like, so that's more emotionally draining.
Well, there's a huge opportunity cost, isn't there, of running a business which maybe hasn't demonstrated the product market fit? Because I guess you've seen real intense product market fit with eConsultancy and dramatic growth, particularly towards the end.
Yeah.
Contrasting that with Guild, and I guess you could look at this and say, well, if I was an investor in Ashley, I'd want you, quickly identifying the stuff that's the next eConsultancy and grows with that sort of scale. Yeah. And anytime you're spending just sort of maintaining something or keeping it flat or, just move on to the next thing, quick, go to the next one. So I suppose there's an opportunity cost component there as well for you.
There is, but and I can think, well, that's 7 years. Well, what did I get for, and I hadn't paid myself anything during Guild either. Right. So 7 years of time and money, essentially, lack of, other things that might have been making money or earning. Say again, I don't regret that. And also if you take something like my Abley investment, which came really good, that's like the opposite. That's like arguably freakishly good luck, or, it's, that was a sort of reverse opportunity. I mean, it was something that came big from nowhere, at least as far as the amount of time and effort I put into it. So, we win some, you lose some, I guess, a bit. I think and again, it's sort of like, well, why did eConsult, I like to think sometimes, I have a good understanding of, the future, I guess, or seeing trends maybe that other people haven't. And, and with eConsultancy, that was things like the internet is going to be a bigger thing, which sounds so bleeding obvious, but at the time really wasn't, or that people might pay for content. They seemed counterintuitive, but turned out to be correct. But then I think, well, if I look at Guild, I think with Guild, I was or am correct about the growth of mobile and the growth of messaging, about a desire for more kind of private spaces rather than just the sort of Twitters and LinkedIns of this world and sort of public social media. I think there is. So I think there's some other things I was right about, but obviously not everything. Otherwise, it wouldn't have turned out as it has.
So now you've got that experience, incredibly valuable experience, I guess, seeing sort of both sides. What next? Where do you go next? And do you sort of hold yourself back to let the dust settle first, or?
That's sort of my plan. I mean, weirdly, and I've talked to and even been tempted to do podcasts or books about sort of exited entrepreneurs and how they do or don't, how they manage that kind of period, maybe the first year or two after they exit a business. And it's a sort of different, maybe emotional journey for different individuals. But some people I talked to, and this feels sort of, it works for me. They said, don't try and make too much of a plan. Like, don't do anything much, or try and resist. Don't say yes to everything, because it's sort of tempting. Oh, more time now. I'll go, I'll do that. They said, no, just take maybe 3 or 6 months to try, maybe have sort of conversations and do bits and pieces. But there's, just don't. And although, I mean, it's interesting with Guild and indeed with Abley, which are SaaS businesses, they're rightly very data-driven, performance optimization, tweaking the machine. It's about creating a machine, whereas my agency days and even eConsultancy, more about content, about sort of marketing in terms of slightly more creative, I guess. And so I appreciate the benefits of sort of quantitative-driven, metrics, target-driven kind of machines, but I just don't enjoy it as much as some of the people-y, human-y, messy, emotional, creative stuff. Yeah. I think that's kind of the truth. And so, so for me personally as well, some people have, watch analyzing everything that they do. They say by Christmas, I want to do this. And by February, I want to have made 2 investments, and that works for them. Whereas I find that a bit like draining, kind of the thought of that. So yeah, to answer your question, no, I don't have a plan, but that is my plan, to not have a plan. Yeah. But then everyone else they say, I'll give you 3 or 6 months, then you'll start feeling bored, or you'll come across something. And so, yeah, maybe. There's certain things I think that I don't want to do. Like, I don't really have much interest in being a non-exec director. I mean, I think it's a great thing to do, but I don't really want to be a consultant. I do bits of advising and mentoring, but I don't want to be a coach, because everyone seems to be, I mean, it's fine. It's good. Did have a business coach for a while, but no, don't want to do that. So yes, I've got a sort of, my kind of plan is also say to have lots of conversations, and there is, I don't know if you, but there's, sometimes you just feel excited about something, and sometimes you feel like emotionally drained, and it's not clear why. I don't know yet what those criteria are, but I can at least be emotionally honest enough to go, I had a meeting the other day. I thought the guy was talking about business idea. I thought this is a great idea. It could make a lot of money, but I'm not at all interested in it. Doesn't excite me. This would be, I'd find this really debilitating to work on, even though I think you might make a lot of money out of it. And so, I mean, I guess that's a bit with that whole thing about entrepreneurs just follow their passion, but it's, where it sort of seems easy to kind of work hard or whatever, because it's something you want to be doing. So, so I need to figure that out. I mean, I'm doing, bits of personal, I'm doing some writing, creative writing short stories at the moment. My wife's a writer, and so I've sort of partly been inspired. It's a personal challenge. I'm playing guitar again a bit, and, there's all the sort of personal bits, but professionally, see what to get excited about.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've spoken to a lot of people on this show about the moment after exit, and some of them describe immediately going into depression or this being the most difficult time of their lives. But for you, it doesn't seem to be like that. It's almost like, for them, my perception is that their identity is so synonymous with their business that when they sell or exit the business, they have an identity void and they don't know what they are anymore. But I don't get that sense with you.
No, I think that's true. That I do love business and all this entrepreneur stuff, but I sit in my head, I think it's not that important really in the end, compared to say family, personal relationships, health. So to me, it's a bit like a game in a way, and I want to win at the game, and I like the game, prepared to invest in the game, but it's still not everything, And so with eConsultancy or with Guild, I don't, sometimes people say, oh, they're like my baby. It's like, no, like, and when I sold eConsultancy, it's like someone's paid fair money for it. We have an agreement. That is what it is. Now, it's not to say I care about my own sort of personal reputation, integrity. And if I have been involved in creating brands, I would like to think that they don't, reflect well on me to some degree, or, but then it's a realistic, so with eConsultancy, there's a period where, well, after the earnout, to some degree even during the earnout, but after the earnout, it's like, I don't run this business anymore. It's not mine, and if the new owners want to do X, I might tell them, I'm not sure that's a good idea or not, but it's your business. So if you do whatever you want to do. So yes, I do have a fondness and some lots of sort of good memories and things, but I don't, certainly didn't feel any sense to, I mean, with the eConsultancy sale, there was this earnout anyway. So mentally it was kind of more of a continuation really. And Guild, if anything, I felt relief sometimes more than depression, as in it's a sort of positive lifting of, sort of energy, which had felt like kind of a grind, was then sort of starting, then you can open new avenues, new opportunities and things. So I think it was a positive thing, actually, really not a negative thing. But that hadn't worked out so well, so maybe it's different.
I really want to ask you about relief, actually, because strangely, my wife likes watching MasterChef, and we were watching it last night, and one of the contestants who went out said they felt a sense of relief.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of, this is a completely different scenario, but often when people have been running like a Ponzi scheme or a scam or something that's becoming more and more and more stressful, and they talk about when the police show up at their door, they feel a sense of relief.
Yeah.
Because the struggle is over.
Yeah.
And I thought about the MasterChef person last night. It had been such a struggle for them.
Yeah.
And although if you asked them, do you want to go through? They'd probably have said yes. But actually, when they got, no, you're out.
Yeah.
Relief was such an interesting experience. And you've just mentioned relief there. So is that...
Yeah, no, I think it's, I'd say that tension where, I mean, living a lie is maybe putting it a bit strongly, but where you are projecting one thing but feeling something else is emotionally kind of quite tiring. So in my case, it was, that, Guild still had a positive future. There were lots of spots of hope or causes for optimism. Or there was this new feature coming out which would change everything. There was this big new client win which would change everything, and then having to think, but it hasn't really, has it?
Right.
And that, living with that kind of tension is, it's like, I guess if one had secrets or a lie you were suppressing, is hard. That I think is kind of emotion. Then so the relief is like, that's gone.
Yeah.
It's out there, you know. I mean, that's, you know, like therapy, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you sort of get it off your chest and it's like, oh, now I don't have to pretend anymore, you know. So I think that's in the case of Guild, they say the times where you're sort of pushing the rock and all that kind of stuff, trying to kind of try these different things. They're still not working out. I think that was hard over a period of time. When you do that for, you know, you can do that for short chunks of time, but if it sort of starts to feel like years, it's like, oh. So yeah, I don't think it's surprising in that sense that it's a sort of sense of relief, or in that kind of, you know, your MasterChef example.
I think that could be really encouraging to people who are watching or listening, who maybe have that feeling inside of, I'm not sure this is, but they don't yet have the clarity to end things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is about things in life general, isn't it? I mean, this could be not necessarily startups or just entrepreneurs, but anyone often people in big businesses, you know, friends who are law partners, extremely successful, and wonder, you know, but they're miserable or something, or should I leave? Should I do this? So I think it's not just to the world of sort of startups and things, but it's about, you know, I get the particularly challenging thing for entrepreneurs is going back to your sort of miners and the diamonds and things, is this nagging feeling, because, you know, the message might be, look, if it's getting really hard or difficult, well, do something else. It's like, well, that's easy to say, but I've got investors, I put all my money in this, the house on the line, how I'm going to get another job. I've been doing this for 6 years, so I might as well do it for another 1 year, and it might come good. The market might change. I mean, there's 101 ways you can persuade yourself that things could get better, or you might, if only, like you read hearing all the podcasts, if only you kept going, you would get to the diamonds.
Yeah.
I say, and you might. This is the challenging thing, isn't
trouble,
it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
But some people probably destroy themselves in the process, you know, and so it's like, well, was it worth it, even if you did get to the diamonds? So maybe not.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And I mean, I was also very fortunate, I think, that because I'd done well with eConsultancy and ably, kind of quite luckily, but financially I was secure, really. And I suppose because eConsultancy had gone well, I could think, well, you know, I've had one successful, you know, I can't be a complete loser, you know, I can't get it wrong. So you sort of, maybe subliminally, you sort of think, it gives you some confidence. You say, okay, this one didn't work, that one did, you know, that's kind of normal.
Let's talk about work ethic then. So you've had a startup which has grown a lot and you've sold, and then you've had a startup which has been more challenging. Both of those situations can be immensely hard work. So how has your, I guess, work-life balance changed over the years, and particularly, you know, as you've had children and things like that? Because I think that's something that business owners, founders, entrepreneurs can find quite difficult.
Yeah, I don't know whether I have some slightly controversial views on work-life balance, or I don't even particularly, not sure I like the phrase even that much. But and I guess the reason is that to me, work-life balance sort of implies, it sort of says, don't work too hard, and don't sort of sacrifice risk your personal life in some ways because you're working too hard at work, and that sort of suggests work is bad and not good, and personal life is all fun. And I don't think that's true. I mean, there's plenty of, you know, work stuff which is good fun, and there's plenty of personal life stuff which isn't fun at all. So when I can talk about finding a balance which makes you happy, yes. Yeah. But I would say, without doubt, in my career, my personal life's been much more challenging than my business life.
Right.
And I mean, there's a lot of sort of personal details in that. But my father died, 7 years ago, and died of a form of Alzheimer's. My mother-in-law and my mother both now have Alzheimer's, and it's fucking, wow. It's bad. That's, you know, it's really shit. And so a lot of those things in that, it's like much easier than raising money or do it, you know, I mean, so I think it's thinking about, you know, what's right for you and trying to get that balance right. And that might be working all the hours that God sends because you've got no wife or children and you want to just do that. Or it might be that, you're at risk of overworking and burnout and you need to step back a bit and things. But I think it's not a sort of binary. I think work-life balance has been seen as, don't work too hard, you know, kind of thing. Whereas I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. I think it depends on, you know, being a father, you know, to two young girls, being a husband, being a son, you know, but managing various aspects of that is harder, I think, because it's a bit more kind of emotional. Whereas business is business. So I sort of see it like a game almost. I think would say I've found it more challenging doing that stuff. And the truth is, like, you see, like with young children, like it's easier to be at work than it is at home with young children, I'd say.
Yeah.
So it's like we talk about work-life balance. When the children are young, I went to work to have some balance, you know, to try to have some peace and quiet, you know. So it's like, and I think people may be honest about this sometimes, actually. Yeah. So I think the hard thing could be you only being at home when you want to be at work. I think it's nuanced. I also think that, you know, I would say, which is sort of controversial, in the businesses that I've invested in, and that's usually they've been early stage, and usually really I'm investing in the person, a little bit the opportunity or something, but mostly in the person. I don't want them to, if work-life balance means them not working very hard and being obsessed about the business, I'm probably not going to invest. Like I had to say, if I email the, you know, founder or CEO investor of a business that I've invested in and that they reply late on a Friday or early on a Sunday morning, I see that's a good sign. And I always think I shouldn't be saying that, because you say no. Yeah, we're not allowed to have that opinion these days. And don't do it, you know, and it's your mental health and well-being. And I do believe in that also. Yeah. But as I say, I think it's a new, you know, I want to see passion and hunger, and the fact that they reply to me means they'll reply to the customers in a similar way, and that they'll inculcate that into their staff. Now, it doesn't mean working all hours, doesn't mean not having holidays, it just means really giving a shit, basically, really caring. And so I don't want to see the people invested in break themselves completely. And sometimes I have had sense investors say, look, you know, it's great that you're doing this, but you're right. You don't push yourself too hard, but do push yourself quite hard, because I'm an investor. You know, what I don't want to see is some, you know, like, oh, well, whatever. Yeah. You know, so it's a weird thing where I think, I mean, I don't see, short of sort of gambling and financial stuff, I don't meet many entrepreneurs, ones who've done well or badly, who sort of don't work really hard. Yeah. I just can't, you know, I think it is hard to say all for balance, but as I say, what balance might mean to you. And by balance, we kind of really mean, I suppose, sort of happiness, positive energy, you know, excitement and things like that. And then, you know, that for different people, that's different. That might be work, or it might be sports, or it might be family, or, you know, different things. But it's, I kind of, I think, again, along with this slightly dangerous myth that you've just got to keep going and going and going, and it'll somehow come good and you'll reach the diamonds, and or that, you know, working too hard or being, you know, work-life balance, you have to kind of can be a bit dangerous. Do you think it's possible to grow a successful company working 9 to 5, 5 days a week? Yes. I mean, and actually I would say I've never worked that hard if you look at it in terms of hours. I mean, I very rarely have worked at weekends. Right. Evenings, yes, a bit, but mostly because I wanted to, really, actually. You know, sometimes at the weekend you think, well, I've got some clear space, I can finally get around to thinking about that. Or as an entrepreneur, not just as an entrepreneur, but, you know, you have things in your head, in your mind, you know, and it's buzzing. Doesn't mean you could wake up in the night or you'd be thinking about something. Sometimes I think that's a problem where it was where you take work home, and, you know, you can have that conversation where you think, you know, you're not properly present, where you're kind of looking at someone, but you're not really listening because you're thinking about something else. I mean, but that doesn't have to work. That could be children, could be anything. But so one has to be aware of that. But it's quite hard, say, when you're running a business and there's all these opportunities, all these challenges and things that they're ticking over in your head. Yeah. Switching off that can be quite hard. But I think then, you know, some people are morning people, some people are evening people, and some people are weekend, and some people need to go on a run to clear, you know, and again, it's sort of finding what kind of environment maybe works ideally for you. And then that's a negotiation of, you know, trying with your partner, with your investors, with your staff about how to kind of, but I never with eConsultancy, I don't never work that hard, even with guilds, you know, in terms of hours. Like nothing, like my youngest brother was a lawyer at Linklater. He's still a lawyer now, but he was at Linklaters, and he used to, you know, unless he did 2 all-nighters every week, you know, and you were in every weekend, definitely, you earn a lot of money. But I mean, it's like you're a beck and call. I know a friend of mine seeing later is a banker. I mean, earning a lot of money, but that's like literally no life kind of thing. So yeah. I don't think it's always the case that entrepreneurs work longer hours necessarily. It might be more intense at certain times, but actually, you know, I'm not like kind of crazy hours. I think also, to be honest, getting a bit older as well, I just don't have the maybe physical, emotional stamina that when you're younger.
Right.
And again, you know, it's like having young children where you had sleepless nights, like broken sleep. Like now I think, God, I don't think I could do that again.
Yeah.
But I did. You had to get through it, basically.
Yeah.
So again, I think some of this stuff, it's slightly life stage related as well. So, you know, getting older, in theory, you have more wisdom and you can run a successful business because you get better at devolving decisions, devolving responsibility. You know, that's something I've been conscious of in the past, where I just take on too much because that's the only way that it's going to get done properly, or I don't want so-and-so to have to do it. The intersection of sort of one's personal life and business life for an entrepreneur is incredibly important. It's, you know, I think, as you say, it doesn't get talked about very much, partly because a lot of the personal stuff is personal, like it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate or want to talk about it, but the two are massively related.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they have to be, in terms of your emotional state, your time, all these things. It's they are a big factor, both one upon each other.
And I suppose as entrepreneurs, we have a certain number of decisions that we make over our life, which have an outsized effect on the results that we generate. And I don't know about you, but I find it really difficult to make amazing decisions if I've been staring at a laptop screen for 14 hours.
Yeah.
Or if there's like some crazy stuff going on in personal life. Like we are organic beings at the moment. So
no, it's kind of I mean, I've noticed, say, since sort of the guild or sort of more intense stuff around guilds now has sort of dropped away a bit. And I've tried, even the fact I've written these 2 short stories, they might not be very good, but I find, and this is, I'm sure, born out of all sorts of research and stuff, but my kind of creativity is sort of happening despite me trying to, like I'd be walking along a city where and ideas will come into my head, like in a way that they just arise kind of thing. And I don't think that would, so when I was still working at Guild, whether it was on the screen or not, must be something there that's sort of blocking or channeling or sort of focus attention on kind of one thing only. Yeah. And so in a weird way, if something's not working, ideally your temptation is to go at it harder and harder and more to try and solve it, whereas actually probably the answer is to step back a bit or get someone else to have a look at it and go, well, you're looking at this all wrong, or that kind of alternate kind of view and things.
Final thing I wanted to ask you about, this is something that we talked about when we spoke on the phone. You're very intentional about the relationships that you cultivate and the sort of network that you've built. I think you're probably more intentional about that than anyone I've spoken to. I wonder if you could just, I guess, give the audience a bit of a rundown on how you think about the people that you meet and how you cultivate and maintain those relationships.
I mean, as I said earlier, I guess the sort of overriding passion or interest for whatever reason seems to have been these sort of, professional communities, networks, groups, whatever you want to call it. And those can manifest as online communities, messaging groups, events, roundtables, all sorts of things. But it seems to give me a lot of satisfaction to sort of bring people together to share and learn from each other. And I'm particularly interested in, say, B2B or professional rather than consumer stuff. So it tends to be areas of knowledge or expertise, people are learning and things. And particularly, emerging new stuff like AI or whatever, sustainability and things like that. Because it's like, I just find it, I suppose, intellectually maybe interesting, exciting. And the sort of people aspect of these kind of communities I just find quite rewarding. So I suppose, I would be networking's like tainted as a word, kind of. That's like go to an event and hand out your business cards and sort of move on quickly if someone's not interesting. I'm not like that at all. But I do say like meeting people, exchanging ideas, putting them together with each other and things. So I guess I'm more sort of a connector. And I've built where eConsultancy was, had over 600,000 registered sort of users. Certainly at one point, people in marketing around the world, I just knew lots of people in the industry and kind of put them together and things, just sort of enjoyed that. So it was useful particularly for eConsultancy, because I was needing to find speakers for events, for example, or awards judges, or someone to give a quote on a piece of industry research and things. So my ability to know the CMOs of 50 of the FTSE 100 companies was important because they were useful, valuable relationships directly or indirectly. So there was a sort of direct ROI. If I was thinking, why am I spending my time doing this? The truth is because I just sort of quite liked it, and it seemed obvious to me that good things would come of it. The hard sort of numbers thing is, yes, we kind of won clients or kept clients or found sort of ways of generating value in terms of content, speaking things out of those people that I knew. And then, after, because eConsultancy was a sort of media business, community business, and because I was often on stage or chairing meetings or roundtables and stuff, my network, it was like the business itself was a network of communities. So I have got loads and loads of connections. They're getting older now, as in like literally physically older, and some less plugged into the kind of new generations of marketers as I should be or was then. But, that network then has subsequently been super useful. So with Guild, the investors, I have 42 investors. And I think bar about 2 of them are all people I met via eConsultancy.
Right.
And most of them were people who, were entrepreneurs, are entrepreneurs themselves, and they built a business, an agency or whatever, a tech company, and sold it, and therefore in a position to invest. And the fact that I'd kind of known them and they respected me and or eConsultancy meant that they'd at least answer my, email or call or whatever. And as actually it was relatively easy for me to raise that money, because hopefully my personal reputation, time I'd spent with them over the years, the success of eConsultancy made it, so that was very valuable, to be able to sort of call in the favors, as it were. But I think I'd like to think I'm fairly generous in my time, in as much as I do take meetings with people where I can't see there's any obvious valuable to me because they're more junior, for example. But if I just they're really passionate about something, I think I can help, then that's a sort of rewarding thing to be able to do, sort of, the giving back thing. But also I believe, and this has happened, that there's serendipity, like you meet someone you think's not going to be, there's no value, and then all of a sudden there's a chance comment, or they happen to know, or you find out their mother's so and so you've been trying to get hold of, and you're like, oh. And so I do believe in that, sort of spending some time where other people, if they were power networkers, will go, I calibrate and score people, and I'm not going to waste more
you don't
than
meet
1
my
minute
criteria.
off. So I'm much more kind of informal than that, I suppose. But I do have, I guess, in the way that maybe when you said I'm intentional, where I feel maybe a bit more intentional, is that I occasionally have met people in my career where for one reason or another I thought, wow, you're really impressive, like really smart or really good at something, particularly if it's something which I'm less good at, because there's a sort of complementarity then there. And I sort of make a mental or sometimes actual note to sort of, their details, or to sort of follow up with them. And because I'd like to work with them, and I think they're probably going to be successful at whatever they do. And an example of that would be Matt, who is my co-founder at eConsultancy, and Ably, CEO of Ably. And I met him, when I was working at an agency back in the late 90s. He was a contract programmer who came in for like 2 days to take over from someone else. And, I was working in a big-ish agency, a couple of hundred people at the time. And we supposedly had all the best developers in London. And he was leagues better than anyone that we had.
Really?
And as well as being sort of brilliantly technically, he was very commercially smart and savvy and entrepreneurial, good with people and things. And I thought, wow, this is someone I need to sort of keep, even though he then left because he was a contract programmer, I sort of kept his details. And then when I had the idea for eConsultancy, I went to him and said, look, I've got this idea and, but I need someone to build the website because I'm not a coder and stuff. And so he did that. So, eConsultancy couldn't have happened really without him. And then my investment in Ably couldn't have happened without the proceeds from eConsultancy, etc. So there are individuals, I think, who can have a disproportionately big impact on your life. That might be a teacher at school or, but so I think, in terms of some of that intentionality, and even now, if you ask me, and again, this might be something which I sense is for people who are a bit older, maybe second, third time entrepreneurs, or just generally a bit older, when they ask about what they want to do, what will give them satisfaction, it's not necessarily, be a billionaire or create they say, I just want to work with good people.
Yes.
Because that's what gives you sort of pleasure and reward. And as it happened, usually can lead to financial or other kinds of success. But given, if you are, depending on your work-life balance, but even if you're being very sensible 9 to 5 or whatever, you still spend most of your life at work or a lot of your life at work. So if you're going to do that, ideally, doing it with people that you respect and kind of learn from, and feel excited about. For me, and I think for a lot of people, that's is super important.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using, and don't forget to leave us a rating and review. This is a brand new show, so we need all the ratings and reviews that we can get. And if there's anyone in your network that you think might enjoy this, then please do send them along.